the final session of the morning, leading into lunchtime. As Darryl mentioned, I've produced quite a variety of books, but actually the first that I've really written is the newest one, which is this one. It's called Digital Bank because it's all about how banks need to transform for the digital world. And the reason I'm holding it up there is that people tell me, why would you want this great big thick thing to carry around? Because surely we should have an e-version. And as you know, Amazon are now selling more e-versions of books than they are of physical books, because it's far easier to read an electronic book and carry around with you, particularly if you're traveling extensively, because you can have choice, than carrying lots of tomes like this. But then my response was, how do you sign a digital book? Because most people, we did a book signing recently for the launch, want the physical book with the signature. And then someone said to me, oh, no, just take a selfie with you, Chris. That'll do. And you soon realize how things are transforming, because obviously industries that can be digitized have been transformed. The travel industry, the obviously entertainment industry, movies and music, books. But I always remember in the 90s when the internet first was erupting into our space in banking, that someone said to me, I don't see that I'll ever really depend on the internet for full retail services like clothes, because I like to try the clothes on in the store and see them. There's now a Russian retail fashion company where you go on their website or their mobile app and you choose the clothes that you like the look of and provide the sizes of the clothes. And within 2 hours, a store van will arrive outside your apartment or house with the clothes you selected in the sizes that you chose, so you can try them on at home and then buy, using a mobile payments app, the ones that you decide that you want to keep, and the driver then goes away with the ones that you don't. So pretty much any industry can be digitized and affected by digitalization. And then we come to the fact that we know that. That's why you're here. That's why we talked about things like Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and the changes that are taking place through hyperconnectivity. But knowing it is then the challenge of how you actually implement it. And the thrust of what I say in the Digital Bank book is that banks were built in the 20th century for the physical distribution of paper through a localized network, and now have to transform for the digital distribution of data through a globalized network. That is a fundamental transformation. As part of that fundamental transformation, banks have to move from being product-focused to customer-focused. The product focus came around because banks had to deal with global clients and they didn't like to deal with local branch managers. Therefore, McKinsey told Citigroup to organize around products, and every bank followed that model. Now we're reorganizing digitally around customers. It's a big change, and it's a change that I see happening not just in banking but in all industries, because we're all challenged similarly. So to find out exactly how we're challenged and what to do about it, I'd like to invite our panelists to come up and join me and provide maybe a few opening views around what they see happening in this space. So can I invite Yuval Dvir from Google, Penny Frohling from Ernst & Young, and Derek White from Barclays to join me. I think that Ben Southworth has been delayed, unfortunately, and so is not here right now. So we'll start with a trio and may go to a quad set over time. But to begin with, maybe just a few background views. And I know that Yuval, you were previously, before Google, managing Skype within Microsoft, which must have been an interesting program to be involved with. And that before that you had many other involvements in other industries, GE, EY and more. Perhaps you can provide, to begin with, a view around how to implement strategic digital change, and maybe the Skype Microsoft example is a good way to start that.
Yeah, thank you. So I didn't manage Skype. What I did was manage the business transformation in Skype. And the story that we had in Skype, which I'm sure you all know and use, is that we had an abundance of data. We had all the data that we needed. But as a business, we didn't really use the data to challenge our business model, to change the way we implement different ways of features in our clients for our customers. So what we really needed to do is to change the way we work as a business, transform the way we work. And from that, we had obviously significant challenges. And one of the main challenges stems from the basic human behaviors. And if you understand the basic human behaviors, you'll be able to change the way people work. Because humans, first of all, we don't like to change. We don't like to change the business. We don't like to change our habits. It's a very difficult thing to do. And from a Skype perspective, if you look at Skype, Skype used to change quite a bit. We had reorgs, we had changes every couple of months. But that's also not a positive thing, because while people can change, they don't treat it as a big transformational thing, and they could continue to have their old habits disguised in a new sort of transformation. From a Microsoft perspective, that was a giant. You would expect it to be a very solid organization a very solid and stable organization that didn't really need to change in decades. There was no real massive change in Microsoft. And why would there be? They were earning tons of money, revenue was growing, so there wasn't that trigger of change as well. And combining those two ranges of attitude towards change, Skype on the one hand was Microsoft, was a big challenge. But addressing the elementary behavioral habits of people was what really helped us transform the way we work, the way we think about the customers, with the way we combine the different departments cross-functionally in the business. And obviously there's more challenges that we can speak later, such as sponsorship in the organization, sometimes senior management expecting results early on and not having the patience to go through a transformation, because that really takes time. And their desire to see business results very soon, and that's also a very difficult thing to do, because business results usually lag after successful transformation. So all these challenges is what we faced in Skype, but eventually that really worked, and in a way served as some sort of basis for the data culture change that Microsoft is going through right now.
I guess my only comment is that a lot of business transformation is always about managing the resources and the human expectations and good communication. Is there anything different about implementing a digital change versus a strategic change program of any other nature?
I think the digital aspect of Skype, if you think about what digital really means, is how to use data and technology in order to know more about the customers, streamline your operations, and be much more faster and agile in the way you work as a business. So from my perspective, whether it's digital or otherwise, you can't in a way separate between the two. If you want to operate properly as a business, yes, you need to take advantage of technology, of digital innovations, but you need to still have those business principles in place, because eventually, until we're all with microchips in our mind, we're still working with humans. And knowing those habits and what drives people, having that ability to empathize with the customers, the users, and your stakeholders within the organization is going to be immensely powerful in order to also influencing the different people in the organization to take on digital, to take on technology, and not be frightened from it. There are many cases where people were pretty afraid of technology, and the biggest challenge from my perspective was making those big roadblocks into someone that could help and embrace technology. And it's a difficult thing to do, but you can't separate between the two from what I've seen. Technology and those business principles need to go hand in hand in order to successfully transform an organization.
Thanks, Yuval. To Yuval's right and our left is Penny Frohling from Ernst & Young, who started out as a banker and then converted. So began at Citibank and is also involved heavily with new tech startups through the Angel Academy, which is actually encouraging women startups in technology in the city. Penny, I mean, do your thoughts concur with Yuval's in terms of strategic change, and is there anything different about digital strategic change programs to normal strategic change programs?
I agree with exactly with what Yuval is saying. I've been doing this for a very long time, and you look at there's very common patterns, and I think there's one of the big mistakes that we tend to make is we tend as an industry to think that everything is completely new. But the analogies between digital now and kind of 1998 to 2001, where everything was E, and now we've shifted E to D, so it used to be e-commerce, and now it's all digital. The analogies, I think, between e-commerce and the transformational aspects of e-commerce are very, very similar to what's going on with digital, and I think there's a lot of lessons learned. So I still have a book on my shelf called Blown to Bits that came out about transformational new business models as a result of e-commerce and how all these new business models are going to transform how things were done. And one of the big case studies was Enron. So it's very interesting to go back to these kind of books and say there's a lot of analogies and lessons we can be learned. I worked on a project for digital cash in 1996. So a lot of these concepts have been around for a very, very long time. It's just an issue of what does it take to adopt these very disruptive technologies, and there is an embedded infrastructure aspect to that, and then there is a people aspect to that is absolutely critical. I think one of the big challenges that we have as an industry, and one of the big mistakes we make, is we have these terms digital, we have this term big data, and defining exactly what that means to us as a business is absolutely key to beginning to catalyze transformation. So digital and big data are enablers for helping us address business problems or opportunities. So, if we have a cost issue on the regulatory side, how does digital help us with that? If we want to delight a customer, how are we going to use digital to do that? That's the level that I think we need to be thinking at from a transformational standpoint, as opposed to saying we have to be digital. It's much more about what is the business question or business problem I'm trying to solve, and how does big data or digital enable me to do that in a faster, better, quicker, cheaper, more innovative way.
I think it's interesting referencing Blown to Bits and e-commerce, and that we saw technology originally coming into most industries and companies to automate back office processing as a cost reduction and efficiency rollout. Then we saw the rollout of PCs and e-commerce as a customer self-service capability, and now we're seeing m-commerce and soon wearables and the Internet of Things, where we just have ubiquitous connectivity. So it's interesting from my experience that a lot of companies talk about investment in, for example, right now, mobile and apps and tablet as a project rather than as a continuum. And I think that's one of the radical differences, that people need to strategically think about how to use digital as a continuum of change rather than just as a one-off project. Do you see the people you deal with actually understanding that, absorbing that and doing that, or is it still very much a project-by-project basis?
I think we're still playing a lot of catch-up in the industry. So yeah, absolutely, it has to be continual. The problem with the financial services industry is we have this huge embedded IT infrastructure that most of us bought in the 70s and 80s, and we keep putting patches on top of it, right? So, you look at some of this app-based technology. Another big problem that we have in the industry is a lot of the digital transformation initiatives absolutely start in our IT departments, and the challenge with that is it's like taking an iPod and sticking it into an 8-track tape player. And now I'm also dating myself to make people that listen to 70s music, but it really is that equivalent. It's an app-based kind of system where you're sticking it on IBM or HP mainframes that have a bunch of middleware and other stuff stuck on top of it. It's absolutely extremely challenging for us to do that. So to a large extent, because of the constraints of that, a lot of my clients are just simply in catch-up. So, how do I put a really good, mobile payments technology onto a mobile phone? It's difficult. Somebody else mentioned the concept of, can I share information across an asset and a liability system? We're still very challenged to do that. So there is a lot of catch-up stuff that we have to do to get to parity with some of our other industries in order to do that. And it's just where we are as an industry, and we have to take that pain while we're trying to ring-fence stuff and do some of the funner bits on the side.
Now, Derek, you've come into Barclays, having been in a new startup internet operation, Juniper Bank in the States, where obviously you've seen rapid change, and I thought it was interesting that you've been heavily involved in the development and rollout of Pingit, which is seen here as being quite an innovator from the Barclays group. So again, do you concur with Yuval and Penny in terms of outlook experiences of change projects? And is there any difference between this and other change programs?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Echo all of the comments that have been shared. It's very easy for large organizations established, especially large multinational organizations, to declare the creation of a program. And then the belief that because a program is created and because management declares it, that therefore people will understand what that means, embrace it, and then go and do it. I think just to touch on a couple of points is we as an industry, and each organization within the industry has to recognize where we are on that digital tipping point. Are we really a digital organization, or are we organizations that operate a large-scale business that has significant bricks and mortar with a bolt-on digital channel attached to it? And how that lens is applied has a fundamental effect on how the overall organization is run, from the way the colleagues think, to the way investment decisions are made, to the future creation of the organization. And one thing that we look at internally, if you compare the style of working in a startup versus a large multinational corporate, I love this concept of learning cycles. And that if you go to Facebook today, or any of the major firms and large technology firms in Silicon Valley, at Facebook, within 24 to 48 hours, you have to have posted your first hack or prototype. 24 to 48 hours. If you take a prototype as a representation of a learning cycle, because it is then an ability to share in a common way that everyone can see the tangibility of what you're actually delivering, they're pounding out 100 to 200 learning cycles a year. Now compare that to an organization that declares a large program, that then says they're going to go about doing something. And I don't know if it's any at all familiar to any of you, that you might be invited into a room. And that room might contain 27 people, 18 people seated around a table, 9 people on a 4-box video screen, and you're there to talk about one of the top 3 priorities for your business. And it's been 3 months for those 27 people to get together to talk about that one top priority for that business, 3 months to have a meeting, right?
Yeah.
And then if lucky, you might take another 3 months and you might pop out a prototype and then get to market. So collapsing learning cycles and recognizing that our consumers, our clients, our colleagues are already living in a digital world. Are we digital organizations? Have we crossed that tipping point? I would suggest is one thing that it starts at the very top. And you heard Anthony Jenkins, our CEO, talk about it this morning. We're already there. We recognize we are that digital organization, and therefore the manifestation of that is trickling down into the way we work. When we came up with the concept of Ping It, it was a translation of a concept from idea to execution in 7 months. The original plan was 2.5 years. We said that wouldn't work. You got to change the way you work, similar to what you said. And we had to fundamentally change the way that team operated in order to bring that concept to execution and land in the market. And it only did 4 things when we brought it to market. And when we brought it to market, it was viewed as a success. But as we brought it to market, it's the rapid evolution of that has fundamentally transformed our organization, creating an engine that is responding to the market, that started as a product, has evolved into a platform, and is now an open ecosystem where startups are building products off of this platform that is Ping It that we've created. And to where what was a person-to-person money movement service has become something to where 20% of our corporate clients come to the bank because we have Ping It.
I guess it's slightly outside your field, but I'm going to ask it anyway because you are representing Barclays on this panel, which is part of the scary thing, I guess, is if you're moving from a physical infrastructure organization to a digital infrastructure organization, then you have a lot of investment in bricks and mortar and people in branches in the case of a bank. And as you have to shrink that, and you do have to shrink that to offset the cost infrastructure, that causes, I guess, a lot of internal frictions. How do you manage that? Going back to strategic to digital change, how do you manage the communication? How do you manage the people expectations?
Yeah, Daryl would be the expert to talk about the infrastructure, so I won't. Well, I'll let him cover that off. But if we look at how we prioritize, and ultimately, my role within the organization is design and digital, And as we look at the creation of the future of the organization, we believe it ultimately comes down to the human at the end of our service product experience that we create with them. They ultimately want to do one of two things when they wake up in the morning. They either want to DIY on a device, or they want to engage with a human in some way, shape, or form, or some level of assisted service. Now that's going to increasingly be the crowd, it's going to increasingly be avatars or AI, and we'll go there in a separate discussion. But if you start to look at then, if that's what our end user wants, the human that we're engaging with, and that's where our business originates, then as we design the business around them and the future of that, designing and translating technology into a human way that is easy, that is intuitive, that is engaging for them to be able to do in simplicity on a small mobile screen first, transforms the way you then engage with your customers, your clients, and your colleagues. And it also transforms how we then create the future infrastructure of the organization. But just on a mindset point, honestly, the biggest impact that any change program in any organization is to get colleagues to start thinking like creators, not changers of a legacy system. We have this thing that when we do our internal startups that we call hoppers, we send people through what we call a cleansing process, where we actually take them and ask them to step out of that mindset that says, you can't do this because you've been in a legacy organization, wherever it may be, for X period of time. You've got to come into this and look at it like, if we were creating this as a new organization, a new process, a new experience, a new product, how would you create it? Set aside financial constraints, set aside human capital constraints, set aside regulatory constraints for the moment, and create what that future should be. Because if you look at your run business, your change portfolio, if you run a business on run and change, you're never going to create the future.
Yep, totally agree with you, particularly as the fact that most of the frontline staff actually understand what's needed for the customer far better than people who are managing them. So get them engaged and involved. Now, you've heard the opening views and salvos of our panel, but we want to hear some of your views like the last session. So you have the app and you have to select this session, not the last one, and join in to answer a couple of questions. I'm just going to take them one at a time and get the panel's views around each one before we move to the next. So let's look at how much of the total cost base you're dedicating to digital business initiatives in the current budget year. Is it over 3% of your cost base, or 2 to 2.9%, 1 to 1.9%, less than 1%, or you have no idea, or you're not spending anything on digital? How much of the cost base of your organization are you spending on digital business initiatives this year? Let's find out what the views are and see if it's expected. Have that sort of countdown music running somewhere in the background. Interesting. Quarter of the audience are not sure, but almost 2 out of 5 are spending more than 3%. Is that to be expected? Is that what you would have thought the results would be, Penny?
Yep, definitely. Definitely. I mean, where I would probe on this, though, is where the digital expenditures sitting, and is it in just pure catch-up? Is it in a cost play, or is it in a front-end kind of client play? Would be an interesting. It would be interesting to hear from the audience where those kind of cost buckets sit.
I'd like to know who the one person is who's spending nothing. I won't ask you to stand up. Derek, I mean, in terms of from a Barclays view, what would your company be on that scale?
I think it's very, very fair to say that we're 3% or more because we are a digital business. And this doesn't dissect down how much of it is run versus the creation of the future organization, but I think it's very fair to say that we're well in excess of that 3%.
Yeah, I think kind of goes back to something we were saying earlier around you really need to define what sort of company are you? Are you really a digital business or a business that's providing physical services that's fulfilled by digital support? And where is digital structure on the strategy chain? And obviously in Google and Skype, Microsoft, it's very high, Yuval, on the chain. I mean, how much exposure do you get to businesses that don't see digital as important at all? Do you actually encounter that sort of group these days?
Less so. I guess there are businesses who are more mature and more tech savvy, and those are easier to work with. They implement the different ways in Google and previously, obviously, in Skype and Microsoft. There are a lot of businesses that don't know anything almost about digital web, how to actually use or harness that power. But what we go through, I guess, similar to what Barclays is also doing, a lot of education, a lot of training sessions with the different small to medium businesses or large organization. Because a big part of, I think, the way Google looks at things, and also Microsoft, is you need to promote a certain sort of attitude within the customer base or within the market in order for you eventually to build on your ecosystem. So training and education is a huge, huge part of that. With obviously external customers, but also internally as well. And we try to keep it close, I guess.
Penny, you were shaking your head because I'm quite surprised here that there's so many that are less than 3%. I would have thought it'd be higher on the cost base, but then I guess there are some businesses where digital infrastructure is not as important.
I think digital infrastructure is important, but you have to put spend in the context of what's going on in our industry right now. So if you look at the cost of compliance in response to regulatory change, it's sucking up huge, huge, huge amounts of budget. And putting digital in a broader context of what we're dealing with as an industry, I think, is actually quite important. And it gets back to the comment I made where we talk about digital. Well, why are we so into digital? What core things in our industry is digital enabling? And I think that's frankly one of the big mistakes that we make as an industry. We concentrate far too much on what we're not. So, I'm very concerned, we're not Google, or I'm really worried about social media, or what about peer-to-peer lending, or what about Bitcoin? At the end of the day, I think banks need to think about, or insurance companies, the entire financial services industry is, we are fundamentally part of an ecosystem, and we enable commerce. And as enablers of commerce, what are the roles that we as banks play in that ecosystem? And we need to get much better about lateral, and horizontal partnering with different parts of the industry, I think, is absolutely critical. The other thing we need to be thinking about is what are the biggest problems that we have as an industry right now, and it's things around risk, it's things around compliance, it's things about how we respond to regulatory change, and how are we using digital as a means by which we can address some of those massive, massive pressures and cost spends in our business. And most of the time, what I'm finding with clients is we're not exactly thinking that way. It's all the front end really sexy stuff. And you need that to make everybody happy and make them energized and make them feel like they're part of a cool digital organization. But where the rubber really, really hits the road and what's really transformational is, well, how can I use digital to address some of the regulatory agenda? The other thing is the massive role that banks can play is hacking, cybersecurity, protection of payments. Fine, let people go do peer-to-peer lending. I'm really happy to maintain the infrastructure behind Apple's mobile payments, but where the banks are absolutely vital and where we're going to be heroes is to address some of the cyber hacking and things like that, and that is absolutely transformational, and that's in our sweet spot. And that needs to be a bit more sexy than it is if one can make things like that sexy. Yeah. I'm not sure.
I guess I might take one step backwards and come back to something Derek said in your opening statement around banking is a digital business. And we ought to define a little bit more about what digital really is, and that we're talking about it loosely. But we're talking about strategic change programs. Where I come from is that most banks really irritate me. I'm not saying that Barclays do. There's others that irritate me a hell of a lot more because they talk about channels and they talk about customer demographic segmentation. And both of those to me are legacy thinking views because channels was based on banks built on physical infrastructure for the distribution of paper through a localized network, beginning with a branch, and then the channels that were layered on top of branch were ATMs and internet, call center, now mobile. And some talk about digital as a channel, omni-channel. I really hate it because it's legacy thinking. Digital to me means that you rebuild the whole infrastructure based as an internet protocol-based organization and that it's digitized with everything on top as a form factor for customer engagement through the digital infrastructure that lies underneath. And that's a re-architecting of the complete thinking of how you deliver a service because you can't have consistency if it's through siloed channels. You can't have a customer-focused segmentation if you have it based on demographics. These days it's psychographics. Again, I think you kind of get that because you're nodding, but pervasively through the industry, I don't think people do get it.
No, and just to to step out of banking for just a minute, statistics I saw the other day in the auto industry is that several years ago, the average human, when they want to buy a car, would typically go to a showroom on average 7 times. Today, that's about 1.6 times before they'll buy a car. And 44% of people are very comfortable now making arguably their second largest purchase. 44% of them are comfortable making that purchase online today. So looking at a digital, if that's where, again, what I mentioned at the beginning, it's a mindset thing. And you either got to go all in on this and say you're a digital business and recognize where are you on the evolution in digital as an organization. The way we look at it is that evolution of moving from products to platforms to open ecosystems. And where is each organization on that kind of digital evolution? And then align the organization against where you're heading again, because the customers, clients, and colleagues, they're already out there. They're living in a digital life, and we can't sit there and hide behind the brick walls that we operate in and say that we're an industry that's different and we don't need to engage with our customers in that way. So using the language of channels and that you used, that is somewhat antiquated language. That's the way that we have monetized that relationship within our industry. But I think it's fundamentally a change in mindset that starts at the very top of the organization and then filters down.
I'd say that about 40% of our audience is digital because they're spending 3% or more of their budget on digital. So that means over half is not. So we'll find out why maybe by the next question, which is to see who owns the digital agenda within your businesses. And again, if you can open the apps and join in, I'd like to know what support you see at the highest level for digital business initiatives in the organization. Is it coming from the board, the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, or the CMO, which is interesting that we have to define the marketing guy, but the finance and the IT guys we don't define. So which is the person who's really owning the strategy for digital within your business? Who's pushing it? Very good, I guess. Not one CFO wants it. It just costs far too much. I don't want it. But having said that, we've got almost 80% with the board and the CEO being the key drivers. That's the right place, isn't it, Penny?
Yeah, I think this would have looked different about 3 or 4 years ago. I think it would have been at the CTO level. And I think it's gone up to the CEO. We just finished a study that's quite interesting where change used to be focused in IT, then it switched to marketing, and because of the fights between marketing and technology, a new position has been created. There's a big trend in the US in banking right now where they've created chief enterprise officers, so you get rid of all the nonsense between marketing and technology. The fact CEOs and boards are owning it also helps eliminate a lot of the noise around it, which creates a lot of just less than productive behaviors sometimes in organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, again, Yuval, looking at Google, I find obviously that Google is obviously quite a visionary company in terms of digital agenda. And recently listening to Serge and Larry and looking at some of the videos around their visions of the future, we now have technology that can, for example, know what a cat looks like without actually ever having seen a cat. It's just studied YouTube, which is a great example of Google. If you go on, it's a TED talk from March, you'll see that there's actually an image of a cat by a Google computer. That's just generated based on what it thinks a cat looks like, and it looks like a cat. It's just analysing lots of YouTube stuff. So as we look at this digital agenda, obviously you need to have vision, and Google has it. So where do you think the digital agenda is going? And equally, looking at the board CEO involvement here, do you think that most organisations will have someone who's going to be a digital driver at the board level?
I think from the industry that I'm in, which is technology, the Google, the Microsoft, the Apple, the Facebook, I mean, that's our bread and butter. That's what we always deal with and talk about, and that's the prime focus. There's not going to be one CEO that's not going to talk about that. Looking at the Sky perspective, and it's a different perspective that I'm looking less from the marketplace and what are the products that we're going to deliver to users, but how are we actually going to get the organization to execute on that strategy? It's very easy to use the terminology of digital, and we need to do this open source ecosystems, platform, and so on. But to actually make the organization change its way and adopt that new sort of way of working is extremely difficult, and that's primarily what I've been working on. So making sure, because there's, the strategy of it makes sense to everyone. But when you go into an organization and you try to change the way they work in order to create those products and services that people would eventually love and pay for, you run into, and I'm sure all of you have experienced that, different sorts of politics, different sorts of agendas, sponsors who were once on top and then gone, and then the next CEO would come and say, while what the previous CEO did was very good and I would like to continue with that, I can't actually, right? Because I need to bring some sort of change. So you scrap that and you start from scratch. And that sort of way of thinking is losing a lot of time and a lot of money and preventing organization to really transform themselves in a much faster way. So what you really need is you really need the CEO, you need the board, you need the support of the CMO, the CFO, or everyone, especially the CFO to contribute the money. But that doesn't guarantee you anything because people change, and at some point you could be very stable with a very strong support or sponsorship of the change you want to drive, and a week later or 2 weeks later, they're all gone. So it's a difficult thing to do, and that's why if you can manage to transform the mindset of the different employees and the middle managers and make them think in a different way, then even when the next CEO or the next executive would come in, I mean, he would face a different reality that he would need to adopt and continue.
I guess two key questions that pop into my head as you were elaborating is, firstly, is there anything that you think other organizations can learn when dealing with digital from the structure that a Google in particular or a Skype has in terms of their organizational ethos? And specifically within that, one of the biggest things that most organizations seem to struggle with is innovation agenda, and how to deal with an innovation agenda, because quite often it's viewed as a separate agenda and then it's hard to integrate it back into the business. So is there anything that companies could learn? So
Google and Facebook and Microsoft, they're all dealing with that sort of challenge as well on a different phase. I mean, the idea here is how do you strike a balance between making sure that you have that culture in organization that promotes entrepreneurship, promotes innovation, empowerment in a fragmented small pieces, but also, resources are not infinite, right? You need to make sure that whatever we do, there is a common purpose, common goal, common alignment. And balancing between that sort of corporate control or alignment to a common purpose and having that innovation and entrepreneurship, which thrives on trial and error of iterative changes, is a difficult thing to do. And that's why I think culture eventually is key in many organizations, because culture is hitting the right balances between those different tensions that you have, innovation, corporate control, and you have got plenty of others of business principles that have those tensions in organizations. So yes, there are things to learn from these companies, and there are things to learn from other companies as well, startups and so on. It always gets more complicated when you reach a certain scale, and the business cannot operate as easily as it was while it was a startup.
I guess bring it back again to Barclays, Derek. It took a while for Barclays to really get a digital influence at the top. I think you now probably have it, but what impact has that had in terms of how is Barclays changing, and who is it driven directly from the top, or do you think it's actually far more than that?
It's absolutely led from the top. And we had the privilege of hearing Anthony this morning, but it's embraced at all levels of the organization that we are a digital organization. I think we do recognize that, and when we define digital, it's July 6th, 1996 was the first day that physical became digital in financial services marketing. That's when a paper application for a credit card was first put online. July 6, 1996. 60,000 accounts in the first day, and we realized we were onto something, right? Physical became digital for the first time on the internet. That internet wave has now moved to mobile, and it's another shift in behavioral experience for our customers, our clients, and our colleagues. And I think it's really important that we don't underestimate the impact of helping our colleagues that are embedded in our business that may have been there for a week. Many of them may have been there for 20 years. And helping them understand the future that is this digital world in which we operate, and how our organizations will function in that digital world, and how their roles will change. I love the statistic that QVC, the online shopping channel, they know that behaviorally, in order for anyone to buy something off of QVC, and it's predominantly women that are buying off of QVC. It's in the 90th percentile, I believe. But they have to watch QVC for 24 hours. Do you know how many 30-second snippets you have to make up in order to get 24 hours? But it's a behavioral understanding of their customer and the hooks that they bring into the way they market their products to try and keep people on there so that they get the equivalent of their digital minutes with their customers, right? And as we look at our digital business, do we look at it as a digital channel? Do we look at it as a digital place to move transactions to lower costs? Or do we look at it as digital minutes? Because we know that we've crossed that tipping point within Barclays where our digital minutes are incredibly valuable for us. And those digital minutes are in the billions. And those digital minutes are increasing on a rapid pace. So, and connecting those digital minutes that we share with our customers, and where we have that shared glass with our colleagues from a digital experience where they meet on that shared glass, is incredibly important. But we cannot leave our colleagues behind, and understand that just as QVC knows their customers, and the amount of visits it takes for someone to understand those micro visits of 30 seconds that make up that 24 hours before they can make that change for their tipping point. Similarly, for us and our colleagues, we have to understand that it's a journey to help them understand what it's like to work in a new digital organization.
Yeah, I think there's a key point there, which is when is the customer ready for digital engagement? Because we were having a conversation, in fact, this morning before this meeting around some customers don't want digital engagement. They're not necessarily there yet themselves. And so I guess, again, it's determining your own business strategy, because on the one hand, you've got to support the old world whilst embracing the new. And then you've got to bring not just the employees and the internal organization with you, but you've got to bring the customer with you.
Absolutely.
And so is there any way in which, again, on the implementation structures, around communications and how you get that human commitment into the process?
Yeah, it comes back to the core essence of our design principles, is that we design either around a DIY experience or around a human engagement. Because we recognize some of our most valuable customers crave that human interaction, and they want that interaction, and we need to be able to engage in a way that makes that as rich an experience as possible. So how do we leverage the power of data that was discussed previously. How do we visualize data in a way and make data consumable and an experience consumable in a way, in a digital way that enables colleagues to better serve their customers that may not want to engage in a digital way, and that they just want that face-to-face interaction. But that you can still leverage digital to significantly change the colleague experience to make that human-to-human interaction much richer.
Yeah, and I recently got asked about things like wearables and TVs and cars and everything on the Internet of Things. And it kind of goes back to that continuum I mentioned before, Penny, where we were talking around project by project versus building a digital organization infrastructure. From your dealings with clients and from the tech startups you're seeing, is there a difference that's coming through in terms of how people perceive digital infrastructure and digital engagement? Or is it just still bringing things through and rolling out and deploying mobile and apps and services?
In terms of what, between startups and large legacy
I'm
companies?
just wondering whether you see culturally the organizations that get digital and what it is about them that makes them get it versus those that don't.
I don't really see organizations that get digital and don't. And the reason why I say that is every single human being, well, the majority, and we can get into the social stratification in Africa and third world countries as to who is digitally enabled and who's not. But let's just focus on something like the UK right now. All of us in the room and most of the population engages digitally. So they have an iPhone or they have an iPad or they're online, and we would be all hard pressed to find anyone that does not engage digitally in some way, shape, or form. So we're our own great digital advocates. What I would say is the biggest challenge that large corporations have is, and again, it's interesting, both of you guys said something very similar where, we want people to wash themselves of, the I can't do it attitude where they come into digital because we do have to behave differently. I think we would all agree that people don't come in with that starting position. There are just fundamental things within organizations that relate to either the hierarchy, the metrics, the budget planning cycles, the short-termism of quarter-by-quarter earnings per share pressures, analyst pressures that create a fundamental mindset of how people have to manage in large organizations. I don't see that from a macro standpoint changing anytime soon. As a matter of fact, I only see it getting worse because of the immense pressure on our industry with respect to the regulatory environment, with respect to the new regimes coming in on suitable persons and the liability that can happen at senior people at an individual level. That kind of thing is not going to go away. There's going to be a fear, there's going to be more risk metrics, and the issue is how do we, as senior managers in organizations that set those policies, acknowledge that and understand how to empower our people, because there is a very significant dichotomy between some of the things we're talking about and the natural environment in which we as financial services professionals have to operate. And I think we have to name that and acknowledge that. But my starting position is everybody gets digital. There is an organizational elements that prevent the level of innovation and risk-taking at all levels of an organization that are systemic. We need to name that and deal with it. But at the end of the day, digital is an enabler to help us create shareholder value and better experiences for all of the constituents that invest in our companies. How do we enable to do it? How do we leverage it to do that? And how do we correlate it to ROE, ROA, profit margin, customer net promoter scores, and how do we demonstrate that very practically? And honestly, I don't think, to a very large extent, any of us in the industry have absolutely cracked that one yet. We need to translate this digital thing into something that is absolutely a business enabler. We're in an era right now where ROE and cost of equity are almost becoming at parity. How does digital enable us to address that very fundamental challenge right now with what our balance sheets look like?
I'm looking at the timing and want to move towards a wrap, but asking each of you one final summary question where you've each now been elevated to be CEOs of your companies, so you're now taking
Not quite
Anthony's
yet.
job. And,
No, thank you.
Right.
I'm sure he'd love it.
A long way to go there.
You're running Google, Yuval, and you're running Ernst & Young globally,
Yes,
Penny.
yes.
And you've got to come up
God
with
forbid.
you've got to come up with the next 3-year change program to make sure your organizations continue to be at the lead in a digital marketplace. What is it you're going to be thinking about doing? I mean, what are going to be the top priorities? What are you going to actually have to think about implementing, and how are you going to implement it? Is it just continuing what your predecessor did, or do you think there's something different that needs to be done? I won't start with you. I'll start with Yuval just to see.
Thank you.
You know, you're leading Google. What's going to be the next 3-year agenda? What are you going to implement, and how are you going to do it?
Well, I don't have complete transparency and clarity into what Google X is doing, but I would assume it's somewhere there. It's all those moonshot projects, always trying to challenge the way, not just a specific industry of Google, whether it's search, advertising, or otherwise, but challenging the way the world works. What can we do better, and how can we play a part? Because in a way, what Google has done is something pretty cool. They've taken a work culture that works, that delivers something fast, of value to different customers in several industries, similar to what Apple has done. They've disrupted and changed industries that they weren't a part of. So if you take that model from one industry that works, and you could apply it on a different industry, I think it can work. So finding a way of where is the next disruption, or which industry has the greatest value, not just in terms of shareholders' value or monetary values, but almost humanity values, is something that I think Google would be very interested in. And I think eventually, if you tie the value eventually to the user and to the world, you'll find a way to monetize that. And I know it sounds maybe idealistic to say, but I think that's what I would have been doing.
Always challenge everything.
Yeah.
Penny?
There's two elements to it. One is, as a company whose raison d'etre is to help you guys in the room, we need to be very, very, very good at developing partnerships across industry sector to help the financial services sector. So kind of walking the walk of being completely au fait with how other industries are evolving and how financial services enables that. We obviously have a massive role to play in continued support on kind of the risk compliance regulatory agenda and getting our clients through that. Looking at digital as ways of enabling that, I think, is quite important. And then the other element that's quite critical is, in all of the angel investing network and things that I do on there, is absolutely vital for me as a professional, because I'm not going to learn about all this funky, wild, high-tech stuff that people are doing within the context of my own organization. It's simply not possible. I have to be out there with the entrepreneurs, reading their business plans, listening to their pitches, because in that way I can start looking at the threads and bringing them together for my clients. But I can't do it in the context of my existing job. I have to do that on the side also, and I think all of us as professionals have to do that. If we think we're going to learn and be absolutely on the leading or bleeding edge of exactly what's going on out there, we got to get out there and do angel investing and start meeting these entrepreneurs.
I would simply continue the commitment to the entrepreneurial and innovation agenda that we're on. But simply put, I would suggest that it's around focusing on creation and not just the run and the change of the business. We need to absolutely focus on the run to ensure that we have the trust of our customers. That's absolutely imperative. But it's the creation of the future organization and looking at the intellectual and human capital that we have in the organization and who are creators and how do we unleash those creators and allow them to truly create the future of the organization, not just change it.
Okay, I'm going to summarise with my own view, which is that at the start I said, is there any difference with digital to normal change management? And normal change management, there's lots of fundamental things around it. You've got to have the CEO and the board driving and leading it. You've got to capture the hearts and minds of the people within the business and the customers. You've got to focus on the customer needs and where that's going in the future and align that with your organizational structure and capabilities for delivery. But the big difference for me about digital is a little bit like Dave alluded to the Industrial Revolution and Isaac Newton, that we are going through a fundamental shift of structure in most businesses from physical distribution of products and services through a localized network to a globalized network where the products are distributed through data. And if the data analytics and leverage isn't there, if the understanding of the data isn't there, then you'll never be a strategic digital business. You'll always be a physical business that's maybe languishing in the last century and not fit for this century. So I would say, 3% or more of budget being spent on digital initiatives is about right. It should be probably a lot higher, to be honest. And if you're not in that space, and if you think you don't need to be in that space, then I just wonder what company you're in. So on that note, I'll say thank you very much to Penny, Yuval, and Derek, and great contributions. Thank you.